In the beginning, before history had a name, before kings ruled, before cities rose, before even memory itself, there was silence, a silence stretching across desert sands and endless skies, a silence broken only by the wind and the stars above. From this silence, stories were born, stories whispered in temples, sung by priests, etched into clay tablets that survived fire, flood, and time. And among these stories, one stands apart. The story of the Anunnaki, the ancient gods who came from the heavens, who walked upon the earth, who shaped the destiny of mankind. Tonight we enter that story, not as scholars but as dreamers, following the echoes of a forgotten past, into a world where myth and memory intertwine. Our journey begins in Mesopotamia, the land between rivers. Cradled by the Tigris and the Euphrates, this land gave birth to writing, to kingship, to temples that touched the sky. The Sumerians believed the very first city was Eridu, a city of reed huts along the waters, but also a sacred place. They called it the home of Anki, god of wisdom, lord of the deep waters. Here, they said, the Anunnaki walked among men. They taught them how to dig canals, how to farm the rich soil, how to watch the stars for signs of the seasons. Not far away, another city rose, Uruk. Its walls stretched so wide that later poets would say, "Go up on the wall of Uruk and see its greatness." It was here, legend tells us, that kings like Gilgamesh would seek answers to the mysteries of life and death. But behind the walls, in the clay tablets buried deep beneath the ruins, another truth emerges. The gods who gave these gifts were not like men. They were something more. They came like the first light at dawn, not with thunder or fanfare, but with a quiet gravity that made the reeds bend and the river listen. In the oldest stories they are named Anu, who held the dome of sky, Enlil, who breathed wind and law, and Anki, who kept the deep waters and the clever arts. They arrived as figures of awe, tall, radiant, and strangely ordered, moving through floodplain and marsh as if following a map only they could read. The Sumerians imagined them descending to places of authority. The temple steps, the riverbank, the high plateaus where men measured the heavens. These were not anonymous forces. They had faces and voices. They argued in the smoke of incense. They feasted on the offerings of kings, and they divided the lands and crafts among themselves. To watch them was to watch the world find a name. In those early nights, people spoke of the sky ones teaching the crafts of civilization. How to lay a canal so barley will grow. How to shape clay so it will remember your words. How to read the stars so harvests will not be a surprise. They were the hands that steadied the first trembling steps of cities. And in the stories, their footsteps left marks that later generations would call law, ritual, and ritual again. From the high places the gods looked down and chose. Kingship, the tablets say, was something that could be given and taken by the gods. A ruler's right to command was not only a matter of might, but of a sacred mandate handed from deity to mortal. When a king spoke from his throne, priests would remind the people that he carried a spark of the gods, that his voice was a continuation of a divine will. This idea comforted people and bound them. It meant that the order of a city, its walls, its granaries, its laws, had a cosmic endorsement. Kings performed rituals to show the link. They climbed temple steps, they received scepters, they shared bread with priests. The ceremonies were gentle but profound, a public joining of earth and heaven. But such a gift also contained danger. When kings grew too proud, when they built monuments only to themselves, disputes rose among the powerful. Priests and nobles watched and sometimes conspired. A king could claim the gods' favor and still find himself on a shifting rock of human jealousy. The divine mandate was a bomb and a blade. It ruled the imagination of rulers and the quiet conversations of those who watched them rule. Ziggurats rose like stairs to the sky, each tier a step in the conversation between earth and heaven. They were temples and symbols, focal points where the life of a city folded into ritual. Imagine a mass of baked bricks, walls that caught the sun, and pathways lined by figures carrying bowls of incense. On the top, the priests moved in slow steps, making offerings and calling names that had been spoken for generations. These structures organized life. They marked the month when barley should be sown and the hour when a king might promise a building. They were both practical, storing grain, coordinating labor, and deeply symbolic. From their high terraces, watchers read omens. The flight of birds, the patterns of clouds, the movement of stars. People believed the gods bent nearer to those heights and that in those moments the heart of the city beat with sacred rhythm. Each brick was a story, each stair a memory. The ziggurat was less a mountain than a memory builder. It gathered work, worship, and words into a single place where heaven and human hands touched. Even gods, the old songs whisper, felt weight. In those tales, some of the divine class labored at tasks dreadful to their dignity. Brick-making, canal digging, the maintenance of sacred grounds. They tired, they complained, and they argued in the hush of temple chambers. The burden was not simply physical. It was the endless maintenance of order, the tending of ritual and the sustained attention that keeping a cosmos required. In these narratives, the gods considered their options. One god might propose more offerings. Another might demand stricter rites. But one quiet, clever mind proposed a different solution. Create beings to share the load. Let creations walk the fields, tend the flocks, and keep the temples warm with small, essential tasks. That suggestion was a turning point. It framed the rest of the story. If gods could make helpers, then the nature of the world itself would change. Labor would move from divine shoulders to mortal hands, and in that redistribution of responsibility, the shape of civilization would quicken and spread. So the gods took clay. They fashioned shapes with patient fingers and then sought the spark that would make these forms more than mud. In some songs, a god's blood was mixed with earth. In others, a breath was stolen from the gods and given to the clay. The result was the first humankind. Soft, vulnerable, and quietly wise in ways the gods did not entirely anticipate. These first people were created to work, yes, but they also learned to pray, to tell time, and to make pots that preserved stories. They carried an echo of their makers in their bones, a trace of divine breath that made them curious and inventive. For the gods, it was a practical invention. For the new beings, it was a beginning of identity. The myths vary in detail, but they share a tenderness about the origin. To be formed from earth and given life is an image that comforts. We are part of the ground beneath our feet, and we contain a whisper of something greater. In that whisper lies both obligation and possibility. Anki and Enlil are like two tones in a long song. Anki, the cunning river-wise god who favors life and craft. Enlil, the will of authority, sharp and sometimes severe. Their love and their quarrels shape the waves of myth. Where Anki brings solutions, Enlil enforces order. Where Anki understands mercy, Enlil measures consequence. This tension surfaces in tales of law and mercy. When the crowds grew loud, Enlil's impatience deepened. When famine pressed, Anki moved secret hands to create remedies. They were siblings who liked different outcomes. One preferred harmony through cleverness, the other through command. Sometimes their arguments played out harmlessly, sometimes they decided the fate of harvests or the tenure of kings. These stories allow listeners to consider the balance needed in life. Wisdom and will, compassion and structure. They are not simply quarrels among gods. They are metaphors for the choices a people make when building a community. The gods' debates echo in the city squares and in the quiet rooms of rulers. Under the Anunnaki's tutelage, the world became less dangerous and more marvelously complex. The gods introduced seeds that would yield grain, taught the method of irrigation so rivers became predictable allies, and shaped the earliest sign systems that would become writing. They taught how to melt metal and fashion blades, how to count the months, and how to chart the stars. Each gift changed the shape of human life. Writing allowed memory to escape the frailty of breath. Irrigation turned floods from terror into gift. Metallurgy offered tools and weapons, shifting the balance of power and craftsmanship. Astronomy made the heavens a clock that could be read and planned around. Yet these gifts came with strings. Knowledge required discipline, ritual, training, and the care of temples that became the keepers of technical secrets. In the hands of a few, these skills could build wonders. In the hands of many, they could also cause conflict. The Anunnaki's presence were seeds of both civilization and its complications. Cities rose like islands on a plain. Uar and Uruk swelled with breath and commerce. Markets hummed with barter. Reed boats slid like slow fish along canals. Streets smelled of bread and pottery and the slow smoke of hearths. The city became a place where strangers met, ideas crossed, and the future felt possible. Walls circled the accustomed markets and shrines, and lives organized around the rhythm of seasons and rituals. Scribes kept accounts. Artisans shaped the world with their hands. A child would learn that his naming mattered because names were recorded and remembered. The community's work fed itself and its institutions, granaries, workshops, and temples that together formed the scaffolding of society. In those towns, people told new stories about kings whose crowns were both honor and burden, about priests who mediated with the gods, about women who tended fields and children who listened and learned. The city gave shape to destiny. It made new ways to be human. At the heart of each city, the temple and the palace stood in a delicate dance. Priests guarded knowledge and ritual. Kings claimed divine mandate and acted as the engine of public work. Laws emerged to settle disputes and guide commerce. They were recited in public squares and carved on steels so that memory would not be lost. These laws read like careful attempts to make life reliable. Rules about theft and marriage, about grain and labor, about what happens when promises are broken. They were practical codes, but their authority often rested on divine sanction. That is, the gods had approved the order, and men were expected to keep it. This system stabilized large societies and allowed projects of great scale, canals, temples, and armies. But it also required constant care. Scribes who could read, officials who could enforce, and a public who would accept the rules. The gods and men together, in their own way, kept the city's heart beating. If you walk through a Sumerian lane at dusk, you would have seen ordinary life alive with ritual. Women ground grain into flour, men repaired fishing traps, children played with clay toys shaped like small animals. Yet even these humble moments often had the quiet presence of devotion. A small prayer before a meal, an oil lamp left burning for a household spirit, an offering at a roadside altar. Festivals made the mundane magical. On certain days drums beat and masks were worn. Communities gathered to reenact seasonal cycles and to sing the names of gods who brought rain or sunshine. Food was shared and songs were taught. Elders told stories to children sitting on woven mats. The gods, though mighty, were also woven into the smallest details of existence, present in the hearth as much as on the ziggurat. This is a world where religion and daily life interlace. The sacred is not separate. It is the texture of a people's waking hours. As cities grew and labor multiplied, human voices filled the plains in ways the old stories found troubling. The number of people seemed to swell beyond what the gods had planned. New markets, new songs, new lights at dusk. All of it created a new chorus. For some gods, this chorus was pleasing. For others, it was a clamor that strained the cosmic order. The stories describe how the gods deliberated, sometimes with sadness and sometimes with annoyance. There is a melancholy in these tales, a recognition that what was intended as careful stewardship can become unwieldy in human hands. The noise of people was also a sign of life, festivals, births, and the always turning wheel of daily work. Yet to those gods attentive to balance, noise could presage imbalance. It is in that uneasy space between abundance and order that the myth of the Great Purge takes shape, a sudden and terrible rebalancing to restore a fragile cosmic harmony. Enlil, whose breath carried storms and whose decrees shaped kings, felt the increase of human activity as a breach. Where Anki found cunning solutions, Enlil heard echoes of hubris. His judgment is stern in many tales. He sees the rising noise as transgression against the intended order of things. In certain songs, Enlil's irritation grows until he persuades other powers that drastic measures are needed. His voice becomes the call for reset. A flood, a purge, a cleansing event that will teach humility and remind mortals of the limits of their sway. This is not cruelty in mythic terms so much as an assertion of scale. A God who insists on proportion between heaven and earth. The narratives do not excuse such extreme measures, but they present them as part of an ancient logic. When order is threatened, extreme correction may be imagined. For listeners, these tales offer both warning and caution about the consequences of unbridled growth. The gods convened in hushed halls, as if in an old court. There they debated the fate of creation. Some argued for mercy, others for decisive action. The council's voices read like weather, shifting winds, decisive gusts, and occasional quiet persuasion. Anki, who loved the inventive and the living, argued for measures that could spare life. Enlil, who measured the cost of excess, argued for a return to balance by force. It is in such mythic councils that the dramas of fate are set. The gods weighed promises and past deeds. They looked upon cities and counted voices like coins. For humans, these debates would later be told and retold as a way to understand the perplexing, sometimes cruel rhythms of history. In the end, the weight of Enlil's decision carried the day. A flood was decreed, a deluge to wash the world and start anew. Yet even in the sternest moments, there were whispers of escape and salvations hinted by a more merciful mind. Anki, friend to cleverness and compassion, could not wholly set aside his care for the creatures fashioned in clay. In the moonlit margins of the tale, he found a way to preserve a fragment of life. He went to a chosen human, a builder, a dreamer, sometimes named Zayusadra or Atrahasis, and in a quiet instruction imparted the secret of survival. He taught how to build a great vessel, how to pack the animals, and how to seal a life away from the rising water. This intimate counsel was delivered in whispers by the river, in the hush between prayer and sleep. It is a tender moment in an otherwise stern epic, a god leaning toward humanity with the will to protect, bending rules to save a line from extinction. The chosen one obeyed, building the ark and gathering life, while others went on, unaware that fate approached in a swelling voice. Clouds thickened like curtains. Winds took a claim on the plain. Rivers, swollen by rains unknown to men, escaped their banks and began to claim fields and houses. The storm's first sounds were a low drum. Then the drum became a roar. Waters rose and the world's familiar edges softened and disappeared. People shouted and prayed, but the force of that deluge overwhelmed noise. Reed huts collapsed, and cart paths vanished beneath eddies. Ancient trees, whose rings had recorded seasons for generations, bent and broke. The sky itself seemed to tilt, and it felt as if the world had been turned like a pot on a slow fire, all the contents rearranged. In the great myth, the flood is not merely a physical event. It is also a moral and cosmic purge, a cleansing that resets the ledger between gods and men. As the storm gathers, the tale holds a space for terror and for the fragile human hope that somewhere, someone has listened and taken steps to endure. The boat was a refuge shaped by knowing hands, planks sealed, animals led within 2 by 2, or in the numbers the god had specified. The chosen family closed the hatch and watched as their world went underwater. Days turned into endless nights. Time became a slow, uniform pulse of waves against wood. Inside the ark there was a hush of survival. The soft breathing of animals, the careful tending of food, the ritual prayers murmured by the saved. This was not a tale of triumph so much as one of endurance. The vessel crossed a world washed clean, and at last the waters eased. When the ark finally moored on a high place, the survivors stepped out into an altered world. The landscape was bare in places, covered in drift and new soil in others. Their first acts were small and careful, to plant seeds, to erect shelters, and to offer thanks to the gods who had permitted them to live. Silence followed the storm. Where there had been songs and markets, there were only long stretches of changed land. The gods who had sent the flood watched, and some repented. In certain songs, their hearts softened when they saw the survivors planting again, making offerings, and taking up the slow work of rebuilding. In these aftermath days, rituals changed. People told themselves and each other the reasons for the flood and how to avoid another. There were new practices, perhaps stricter rites or fresh vows, designed to reweave the strained relationship between the divine and human order. The flood's memory stayed in the memory of nations. It became a lesson told at hearths on quiet nights. Humility first, pride later, care for the balance, and a sense that life can begin anew, even after the worst of losses. From that small band of survivors, the world spun back into motion. They taught their children the lessons of the ark, how to read the clouds, how to set seed in prepared soil, how to keep a sacred flame. New villages rose where old ones had been swallowed. New canals were cut to channel water kindly rather than leave it to rage. This renewal was not instantaneous. Rebuilding took time, and there were moments of desperation. Yet humans proved resourceful. They turned survival into routine and managed land with renewed patience. The gods, seeing their creations persevering, sometimes offered new covenants, promises inscribed in sky and stone, assurances that the world would continue if humans honored certain ways. So life resumed, small acts of planting, of baking, of building. Songs were taught to children about the flood and about the hands that saved them. Out of catastrophe grew a more cautious hope. Cities, patient as seeds, rose again. Uruk's walls were rebuilt, foundations set deeper, and the ziggurats were raised once more to meet the sky. Trade resumed along canals, and craftsmen resumed making pots that would hold grain and stories. People exchanged wares while priests kept careful lists of offerings and debts. The temple economy, that intricate system of distribution and ritual, resumed its role in organizing labor and care. Where there had been disorder, laws were reinstated or newly crafted to guide trade and marriage and liability in a world made fragile by the memory of flood. Men and women returned to the work of life with the steadiness of those who had learned to expect both bounty and risk. These rebuilding years were quiet revolutions, the steady labor of many hands shaping a world lessened by catastrophe. As cities stabilized, new rulers emerged. Their legitimacy was often represented as a continuation of divine favor. Kings were said to be chosen or named by the gods, and their inscriptions celebrated both their military deeds and their piety. Monumental works followed. New canals, grand temples, palaces that announced a ruler's ability to command both labor and loyalty. With kingship's return came renewed efforts to codify life. Laws were carved on stone so that their permanence would be a bulwark against forgetfulness. The ruler's duty, in these tales, was not simply conquest but maintenance of balance. To ensure that canals flowed, that grain stores stood full, and that the rituals that placated the gods were faithfully observed. Thus the cycle turned. The gods shaped the city shaped law, law shaped memory. It was a long and careful dance. Among the many voices that rose from these lands, one poem became a mirror for human longing. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a king who was part human, part divine, a ruler of Uruk famed for strength and for the ache of not being immortal. Gilgamesh's tale is marked by friendship. The wild Enkidu turned companion, the grief that follows the friend's death, and the long quest that follows, to find the secret of eternal life. His journey leads him through deserts and to the feet of wise old ones who have tasted other worlds. In the end, Gilgamesh learns a difficult comfort. Immortality is not for the living in the sense of endless days, but in the endurance of deeds and the memories left in the hearts of others. He returns to Uruk, and the city's walls stand as his true legacy. This story is a human anthem, a soft, sorrowful exploration of the limits of power and the tender consolation of being remembered. Empires wax and wane. Over centuries, Sumer's power diffused as new kingdoms rose and as weather and soil changed. Salty fields here and shifting politics there made the task of maintaining great cities more difficult. Invaders came from other lands. New languages crept into the marketplace. Once dominant centers became quieter, their temples less resounding with the same intensity. This decline is not a simple end. It is transformation. Names change, but certain rhythms persist. The images of gods and kings remain in tablet lines and in pottery fragments. People move, languages mix, and cultural features travel like seeds in wind. Through these shifts, the memory of the Anunnaki did not entirely vanish. It adapted, like a melody that changes key but keeps its tune. From the shifting landscape, Babylon rose as a center of power. Under kings who claimed both human skill and divine sanction, Babylonian culture gathered many threads of the older stories and reworked them. New law codes were proclaimed, crafts flourished, scholars began to collect and copy older texts, preserving them across centuries. In these new courts, the old gods found new names and new roles. Temples were rebuilt and repurposed. The memory of primeval events, floods, births, the coming of the sky gods, was shaped into curriculums of story and law. In this way, the ancient Sumerian heritage lived on, braided into new regimes and reinterpreted for changing times. As centuries passed, the Anunnaki receded from daily sight. Priests continued to sing their names, and rituals persisted in the margins of life. But gods who once walked may have become more abstract, more figure than face. Their presence softened into mythic background, invoked in liturgy, recalled in tales, but less likely to be seen in broad daylight. Yet echoes remained. Place names, temple dedications, and the language of ritual. Even when the old temples fell silent, their stones remembered the labor of hands that had built them. The Anunnaki, in memory, became part of the cultural archive. Stories people read, recited, and used to anchor their identity. Millennia later, scholars dusted off those clay tablets and learned to read the wedge-shaped marks. For the first time in many ages, modern minds could look back and hear the voices of long-dead scribes. Museums and libraries became new temples, storing the fragile records of ancient life. Translation opened a window into the minds that had sung the Anunnaki's names. With translation came reinterpretation. Some readers saw metaphors for social order. Others saw allegory. Still others saw hints of forgotten technologies. The old stories met a new age, where scientific inquiry and imaginative speculation walked together. This meeting would produce both careful scholarship and wild theories, each a mirror of the age that produced it. Modern imagination asks a tempting question. What if the sky ones were not merely archetypes but visitors? Some authors propose that the Anunnaki were travelers from a distant world, beings whose knowledge appeared godlike to people of the age. They name planets and craft, they suggest cycles and return, and they weave patterns between ancient monuments and celestial maps. These ideas are alluring because they play on a central human fancy, the wish that the heavens have sent us help, or warning, or instruction. They also stretch the stories into new forms, speculative, cinematic, and sometimes controversial. As stories, they add a glittering layer. As history, they require careful testing and evidence beyond metaphor. The rain had ended, but the earth still whispered. Beneath layers of mud and broken stone, the old cities slept, Eridu, Uar, and Nippur, waiting for curious hands to uncover their memories. In the silence after the storm, only the wind moved, carrying traces of something ancient. The rivers had changed their course, but somewhere deep beneath the new soil, clay tablets remained, pressed with tiny marks, lines, and symbols that once told the stories of gods and men. A wanderer walked along the desolate plain, his feet sinking into the wet ground. In his dreams, he still heard them, the voices of the Anunnaki, not as thunder now, but as a faint hum in the heart of the world. He could almost see them, Anki by his waters, Enlil in his winds, Inanna beneath the crescent moon. He bent down and touched the clay, soft and cool. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, he felt a pulse, like the earth remembering itself. And then he knew the story was not over. For as long as humans sought to understand their beginning, the gods would never truly sleep. Their echoes would rise again, reshaped in new words, new faiths, new myths. And so, as the stars returned over the rivers, a new whisper began, a memory stirring beneath the floodwaters. The story of the first dawn was ready to be told once more. And so, as the earth dried and time moved forward, the clay waited, silent, patient, eternal. From that sacred dust, the gods would breathe again. The wind was warm that night, carrying whispers across the riverbanks of Eridu. Within the temple of Anki, the god of wisdom, a council gathered. Their forms shimmered in torchlight, tall, radiant, unearthly. Anki spoke softly, his voice deep as the sea. Let us fashion a being to ease our burden, one who will tend the earth, harvest its gold, and remember our names. From the clay of the Abzu, the sacred waters, they shaped the first man. Dust and divinity mingled as Anki's hand pressed life into form. Then came the breath, a quiet moment that divided silence from song. The being opened its eyes, the first human, neither god nor beast, but something in between. And from that breath, civilization began to stir. Fires lit the night, songs filled the air. The Anunnaki watched, knowing their creation would one day outgrow its makers. At first, mankind served obediently. They tilled the soil, carried the stones, offered prayers to the shining ones. But time, even to gods, is a patient teacher. The humans multiplied. They built shrines, they loved, they fought. And soon, the noise of their lives rose too loud. Enlil, Lord of the Winds, frowned upon them. They have forgotten their place, he said. They speak as if they are equals. Their cities spread like vines. Yet Anki, ever the protector, whispered to his brother, "They are children of our own hands. Let them live, for their stories are ours." And so began the quiet war of heaven, not of swords but of choice, between Enlil, who sought to silence humankind, and Anki, who chose to save them. The skies darkened over Mesopotamia. The rivers swelled, restless under unseen hands. Enlil's anger echoed through thunder, while Anki stood silent by the waters, feeling the weight of fate draw near. In the temples, the priests wrote of omens, stars falling from the heavens, beasts walking where they should not. The Anunnaki had decided mankind would be washed away, but not all agreed. Anki, bound by compassion, visited a man in dreams, Sayusadra, the wise one of Shuruppak. He whispered through visions, "Build a vessel, gather your kin, your beasts, your seeds of life. The flood is coming." And so, under a shroud of secrecy, Sayusadra labored, guided by a god's sorrow, building hope plank by plank. When the first drop fell, it was almost gentle, a kiss from the sky. Then came another, and another. The rain turned to torrents. The rivers broke their banks. The world screamed beneath the flood. Mountains vanished. Temples dissolved into waves. From above, the Anunnaki watched in silence, their cities of gold trembling under storms they had unleashed. Yet amid the chaos, one small ark drifted, holding the last memory of humankind. Inside, Sayusadra whispered prayers to Anki, thanking him for mercy even as the world drowned around him. After many days, the waters began to fall. The ark rested upon the mountains of Dilmun, a silent world reborn. When Sayusadra stepped out, he wept. The earth was quiet, washed clean, waiting for new stories. Then, from the mist, Anki appeared, his eyes heavy with sorrow and pride. "You have endured," he said. "Remember this covenant. The gods will watch, but they will not rule as before. You are free to build your world again." And from that moment, the new age began, the age of mankind, The gods faded into myth, but their blood still flowed through kings, prophets, and dreamers. Centuries passed. The floods receded into memory, whispered as legends by tribes and kings. Yet the descendants of Ziusudra carried something different, a spark that set them apart. Their eyes held a strange knowing, as if they remembered the sound of the storm and the silence that followed. These were the keepers of the old blood, born of man yet carrying traces of the divine. From them rose the first dynasties, kings who claimed descent from the gods. In the tablets of Sumer and Akkad, we read of Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, a king whose dreams echoed with voices not of earth. The priests built temples to honor the vanished Anunnaki, but behind the rituals lay secrets, maps of stars no man could see, formulas for metals not found in clay. The old gods were gone, yet their knowledge lingered, passed through bloodlines, hidden beneath crowns and scrolls. And as generations turned, those who bore the mark of the ancients began to hear whispers once more, voices in the wind, calling them back to where it all began. In the highlands of Mesopotamia, beneath the shadow of forgotten mountains, a gathering took place beneath the stars. The air trembled with a hum, faint, rhythmic, familiar. They came not as shining gods this time, but as whispers of light, shadows that flickered in the dark. The watchers had returned, not to rule, but to observe what had become of their creation. They found cities filled with pride, palaces reaching toward the heavens, and rulers who spoke their names as legends. Yet they also found fear of death, of time, of the unknown. The watchers moved unseen among men, guiding dreams, planting thoughts of invention, of wonder, of faith. They inspired prophets and kings, artists and seers, each carrying fragments of a forgotten truth. But with guidance came corruption, for where knowledge is given, power soon follows. And once more, mankind began to rise too high, too fast, and the heavens grew restless. In the heart of Shinar, a great king dreamed of unity. "We will build a tower," he said, "whose top will touch the stars." Stone upon stone, the people labored, their chants echoing across the plains. The watchers watched silent, divided. Was this pride or progress? Creation or defiance? The tower climbed higher, defying clouds, its peak shining like fire in the sun. But as it rose, the world began to tremble. Voices tangled, languages shattered, and men turned against one another. The tower fell. Dust swallowed its glory, and silence returned once more. From the ruins, humanity scattered, their tongues divided, their memories fractured. Yet in the hearts of a few, the old spark endured, a memory of the gods who came before, and the promise that one day they might return again. Far from the fallen tower, in the deserts beyond Uar and Akkad, a lone priest kept the old ways. Night after night, he climbed the temple steps and watched the heavens. The stars, he said, were not lights, but letters, messages left by the Anunnaki for those who still remembered. He charted their paths on clay tablets, marking strange alignments, tracing the journey of one star that moved against all others, slow, steady, deliberate. The priests called it Nibiru, the wandering star of the gods. In his dreams, the priest heard Anki's voice. When the wandering star returns, the blood of the gods will awaken once more. Old voices will rise, and memory will return to mankind. He wrote these words and sealed them in a jar of clay, hiding it deep beneath the ziggurat of you are. Thousands of years later, fragments of those same words would be found, and scholars would call them myth. But for those who listen between the lines, the prophecy still whispers that the sky remembers and that time moves in circles, not lines. As centuries turned, the memory of the Anunnaki faded into fable. Kings became dust. Empires fell. The gods who once walked the earth now slept beneath it, their temples buried, their names softened by sand and silence. Yet deep beneath the ruins of Eridu, something stirred. Not life, but resonance, a vibration so old it felt like a memory awakening. Legends spoke of 7 sleeping gods, entombed in crystal chambers, waiting for the world to remember their light. Some said they were imprisoned by Enlil's will, others that they chose sleep, weary of humanity's wars. But when comets streaked across the skies and the rivers ran dry, the whispers began again. Dreams grew vivid. Artists painted visions they could not explain. And far below, the echoes of the ancients began to hum once more. A song of awakening, waiting for its chorus. The world changed as it always does. But every age, there are those who dream too deeply, who hear voices in thunder or find patterns in stars. In the age of Babylon, these dreamers became prophets. They spoke of the old gods returning, not as conquerors but as watchers reborn through human minds. They said wisdom would come again from the east, that men of science and spirit would rediscover the hidden fire, and that through this the Anunnaki would awaken, not in the flesh but in thought, in art, in the endless pursuit of understanding. Some call it enlightenment, others revelation, but perhaps it is only memory, the part of us that remembers what we once were, when gods walked beside us and the earth still whispered their names. Beneath the sands of time, before stone became scripture, there was an agreement not of nations or kings, but between gods and men. Anki, the wise, whispered the covenant in secret. He told the first humans that they were more than dust and breath, that within them burned the spark of the divine, a piece of the very light the gods used to shape the worlds. But this gift came with a shadow. Memory would fade, and the search would begin again in every age. Men would build temples, write books of law and prophecy, forgetting that the God they sought had once walked beside them, and now lived within. The covenant was simple. As long as man remembered wonder, the gods would never be truly gone. But when man replaced wonder with certainty, the gates of heaven would close again. So even now, every question we ask, every mystery we chase across stars or scriptures, is part of the covenant, our endless dialogue with the divine silence. It is said that somewhere, beyond maps and time, stands a hidden library, built not of stone, but of memory. Every word ever spoken, every dream ever dreamed, is etched upon its invisible walls. The ancients called it the Hall of Records. Others name it the Akashic Field. In that place, the stories of the Anunnaki are not myth. They are living echoes, waiting for consciousness to awaken them again. When a human mind dreams deeply enough, it opens a door to that vast archive. The poets touch it by accident, the prophets through vision, the mad through chaos, and from that library the voice of Anki still calls, not to be worshipped, but to be remembered, because memory is immortality, and the gods never die, they only wait to be read again. There are dreams older than humanity, dreams of gardens bathed in golden mist, where rivers of light flowed instead of water. The ancients called it Eden, a place between heaven and earth, where gods shaped life from clay, and the first humans awoke to a song they no longer remember. But what if Eden was not a place, but a state of being? A time when man and nature, God and earth, spoke the same language? When the fall came, it was not from grace, but from forgetfulness. We forgot the song. We forgot that creation was inside us all along. And yet, in every child's wonder, in every artist's vision, in every sleepless night where dreams feel too real, Eden still whispers, calls not to return, but to remember. Across the world, the ruins remain, pyramids, temples, and monoliths that defy explanation. Civilizations separated by oceans, yet built in the same sacred geometry, guided by the same stars. Who taught them? Some say it was coincidence, but the patterns whisper otherwise. The stones align with Orion, with Sirius, the same constellations sacred to the Anunnaki. Perhaps those ancient architects were not slaves, but students. Perhaps the gods didn't vanish. They simply left behind their blueprint in stone. Every pillar and chamber was a message. We were here. You were with us. And maybe we are still building according to that silent design, without even realizing whose dream we're continuing. Time does not flow as we think. It is not a straight river, but a spiral, a song that repeats with new verses. The ancients understood this. They believed that every age ends and begins again, that civilizations rise, fall, and are reborn, each echo carrying lessons from the last. The Anunnaki, they said, were not gods of creation, but custodians of cycles. They taught humanity to build, to record, so that when the flood of forgetfulness came, the seeds of knowledge would survive. Every time we rediscover the old truths, every time we look up at the stars and wonder, we are remembering a promise older than history. And maybe that is why time feels familiar, why déjà vu lingers, because we have all been here before. They say the Watchers never truly left. They walk among us, hidden behind ordinary faces, their eyes carrying the stillness of 1,000 years. Some guide quietly, in science, art, and the whispers of inspiration. Others observe, waiting to see if we are ready again. In the moments between sleep and waking, some souls remember their gaze, a flicker of light, a soundless voice reminding us, you are more than you remember. The return of the Watchers will not come with fire or skyships. It will begin with awareness, the awakening of our own ancient selves. For the divine was never in the heavens alone. It was written into our DNA, waiting for us to read it again. High in forgotten mountains lies a temple no map records. Its doors are sealed not with locks, but with disbelief. Inside, no prayers are spoken, no statues stand, only silence, vast and alive. Those who enter hear their own thoughts dissolve into something greater, presence, ancient yet familiar, like the heartbeat of the universe itself. Some say this is where Anki still dreams, keeping watch over the human story, guiding it softly through the ages. The silence in that temple is not emptiness. It is invitation, a space for remembering what was never truly lost. And so the story circles back to the beginning that was never an end. What if creation was not a single event, but an ongoing dream shared between gods and men? A dream where the divine explores itself, through the eyes of humanity. The Anunnaki may have shaped the first bodies, but we, through imagination, love, and wonder, became the continuation of their creation. When we dream, we touch the same realm they once walked. When we create, we become their equals. Maybe that is the secret they wanted us to find, that gods were never meant to be worshipped, but remembered so we could become what they once were. The dream continues, and tonight, as you drift between thought and sleep, perhaps you too will hear that ancient whisper. You are not separate. You are the story itself. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world sleeps, some souls feel a strange homesickness, not for a place on earth, but for the stars. They look at the constellations and feel a pull, a whisper of memory that doesn't belong to this life. The ancients called them the starborn, souls who carried within them the light of the gods. They are drawn to mysteries, to creation, to the endless search for meaning. Perhaps you have felt it too, that subtle ache when you look at the night sky, the sense that you came from somewhere else. It is not imagination. It is remembrance, a memory echoing through the DNA, calling you home to the origin of all stories. Far beyond the edge of our galaxy, where light folds upon itself and time slows to a breath, there is said to be a gathering place, the Council of Lights. It is not a kingdom or a planet, but a meeting of consciousness, where beings from countless worlds share in the shaping of creation. The Anunnaki were once part of this council, guardians of life, architects of evolution. But as the ages turned, some fell to pride, others to compassion, and their voices faded into myth. Still, the council watches. Every world that dreams, every species that reaches for the stars, becomes part of its melody. When you meditate, when you close your eyes and feel something vast beyond words, perhaps you are hearing that same cosmic song, echoing across eternity. Long before paper and ink, knowledge was stored in living beings, keepers who carried sacred memory from age to age. They appeared as prophets, healers, wanderers, never staying long, always searching for those ready to remember. They told stories not to teach, but to awaken, for the truth, they said, could never be given, only remembered. The Anunnaki entrusted them with symbols, keys hidden in myths and dreams. Each tale, each song, a fragment of the divine code that built reality itself. Tonight, as you listen, you too are becoming a keeper, for every story remembered is a star relit in the vast constellation of human memory. Before Eden, before Eridu, before even the first sunrise, there was another garden, a realm not of earth and water, but of light and intention. It was said that all souls once walked there, as pure thought, as curiosity unbound. The Anunnaki called it the field of becoming, where dreams shaped form, and form shaped dreams. When they descended to earth, they carried a fragment of that garden within them. And when humanity was born, that fragment took root in every heart. This is why creation feels so natural to us, why we build, sing, and imagine, because deep down, we are still gardeners of that eternal field. And perhaps when we sleep, we return there to dream new worlds into being. Everything that was, is, and will be exists in a single breath of the infinite. The ancients knew that creation was not made once. It is happening now, in every heartbeat, every thought, every act of kindness and despair. The Anunnaki, too, were part of this endless rhythm, beings learning to understand themselves through creation. Some say they fell because they forgot they were part of the whole. Others say they rose higher than ever, by giving humanity the chance to remember for them. Perhaps that is why we feel both lost and divine, because we are completing a story that began in the stars. And maybe that story is only waiting for one thing to end: our forgetfulness. In the quiet that follows the storm, there is a sound, soft, steady, ancient. It is not the wind, nor the earth, but the hum of existence itself. The Anunnaki called it the first song, the vibration that shaped galaxies and souls alike. When we speak with love, when we forgive, when we imagine, we sing that same song again. The more we remember it, the brighter the world becomes. So tonight, as you drift deeper into dream, let that sound rise again within you. Let it remind you that you were never merely human. You were always part of the melody. Long after the great flood had receded and the temples had turned to dust, there were still those who watched, silent figures in the corners of time, known in whispers as the Watchers. Some said they were the children of the Anunnaki, those who had stayed behind when the gods withdrew to the stars. Others believed they were humans, awakened too soon, who remembered too much. They wandered the deserts and the mountains, carrying fragments of forgotten truth, symbols, songs, and numbers that hummed with power. They were neither angels nor men, just keepers of balance, guarding the bridge between heaven and earth. And though history buried their names, their presence never left. For every prophet who dreamed of light, for every philosopher who sought the soul, they were there, guiding, whispering, watching. It is said that in a far-off age, one of the Watchers lit a great flame upon the earth, not of destruction, but of understanding. This flame spread from torch to torch, through Egypt, Babylon, Greece, through scrolls, through symbols, through stories. And in each age it took a new name: wisdom, illumination, enlightenment. Yet those who carried it often faced exile or fear. For light, when it shines too brightly, casts long shadows. The Anunnaki had once warned of this, that knowledge without balance becomes a double-edged sword. Still, the flame endures. It flickers in every thinker, every dreamer, every question whispered to the night sky. And maybe that's all the gods ever wanted, for us to ask. The Garden of Eden was not a place. It was a state of being, a memory of harmony that still lives within us. When the Anunnaki departed, they didn't take the divine spark away. They hid it in the one place no one thought to look, inside the human heart. Each act of kindness, each spark of creativity, is a leaf from that eternal garden. We build temples from stone, but the true temple is built from moments of compassion. Perhaps that's what the old stories were trying to teach, that paradise was never lost, only forgotten, and every time we love, we find our way back. Time does not flow forward, it circles, like a river that always finds its way back to the sea. The Anunnaki knew this. They saw that every civilization rises, shines for a moment, then returns to silence, only to be born again in a new form. You and I, listening and dreaming tonight, are part of that same current. The names change, Sumerian, Babylonian, Roman, human, but the essence remains. Every story we tell is another ripple in the river of remembrance, and when you close your eyes, You are floating in that current, drifting through lifetimes of wisdom that you once helped create. There is a legend among mystics of the hidden ones, souls who walk unseen through every era, guiding humanity from behind the veil. They do not rule, they do not preach, they simply remind. A poet who writes of stars, a scientist who dreams beyond logic, a child who speaks of visions before forgetting. These are their voices. They carry the same light the Anunnaki once bore, the same truth whispered in Eden, the same flame that Prometheus stole. We meet them without knowing, and something within us stirs, a spark, a calling. They are proof that the divine never left. It merely learned to walk among us. Every myth ends with a promise that one day what was lost will be found. Some say the Anunnaki will return, not in ships, but in consciousness, when humankind is ready to remember its place among the stars. Maybe they never left at all. Maybe they've been waiting, patient as the constellations, for the moment when we stop looking up and start looking within, because the stars we search for have always been reflected in the eyes of every human being. That is the true return, not of gods, but of memory. And so the story circles back to where it began, in silence before the first word, before the first breath of creation. You have wandered through galaxies, walked with ancient gods, and remembered what it means to be both mortal and divine. Now, as you drift toward sleep, let the music of the cosmos cradle you. Let the voice of history fade to a whisper. For tonight, you are part of the dream, a dream older than the stars themselves. And when morning comes, you will carry a little of that starlight with you, a quiet knowing that you were always more than human. You were part of the story all along. If you enjoyed this journey through forgotten time, let your dreams carry you further. When you wake, return to History Digger where the past still whispers. Our next story awaits, a tale of creation, loss, and divine fire. Until then, sleep well beneath the stars.